look forward to your talk. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. So I have kind of three different hats that I wear. So I graduated from engineering school, but then I was interested in sustainability, and I only worked in engineering for kind of a few years, although my work still has some engineering bent on it. But I studied climate science, and I was a climate researcher for about 5 years. I was working with Earth Institute of Columbia University. And then one thing I realized was that, and this was way back in 2005-06, we actually knew enough about climate change, but we were not doing enough to actually address that. So I shifted from trying to become academic and a researcher into execution side. And my focus was how do we transition corporates into seriously addressing climate change and becoming part of the solution, because at that time we very well knew that the governments were not doing enough. Have to say neither governments or corporations are doing enough, but that's the challenge that we currently have, and that's what we want to do. So I want to ground this conversation by spending a little bit of time talking about climate crisis. We don't call it climate change. I know it's called climate change here, because it's really a crisis, and the window for action, depending on whom you ask, are either very narrow or already closed. So this is why we need to kind of start thinking about it, saying why is energy transition important, and ground it on climate. This, I'm sure you guys study climate science, right? In some level.
Science is generally talk about climate change, but this is a
right. So this is where we are talking about. The starting point is 800,000 years, and this is where we are now. Not only we have raised carbon levels into a hitherto unseen in the last 800,000 years, we've done it at a very, very rapid rate. And what that means is that quite a lot of species are not able to adapt to this change. And that's the part of the problem. Now you can ask, has the Earth seen the current carbon dioxide concentration is about 420 plus? Have the Earth seen more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere before now? And the answer is yes. But the conditions in those periods were so different, because we had sea level probably about 20 meters higher than what it is now. Right? So the challenge is that if we maintain these carbon levels, how much of land, for example, would be available for humans and other species, for us to live on? And it's going to be very much less than what it is. Now, what's going on now? Here are the 10 hottest global years on record. And apart from 2010, everything else is past 2013. So 2013 to 2021, all the years are here. Only 11 and 12 is not there, then 2010. This shows that how bad the situation is going on. Now, we talk about the Paris Climate Accord, and the temperature that we are trying to put as a ceiling is 1.5 degrees, and we are perilously close to that. Okay, so if you look at the Paris targets, aspirational target is 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial. So that's the absolute target. Aspirational target is 1.5 degrees. This shows you the global temperature range change as well as Armenia. So the top part is in Armenia. And you can see on this one, even though there is more concentration here, this is 0.6 degrees. And here we are even crossing 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial. So there is more warming happening here than the global average. Okay.
Why?
It's not uniform. The climate change, and I hope there are some more slides here. I'll show you. Different regions warm at different levels. So if you look at the fastest warming region compared to what used to be is actually the Arctic, right? Tropics and when you come to some of the latitude, so the kind of close to the equator, the temperature increase is much slower. But the problem is for ecosystem in the tropics, even a 1 degree temperature increase will be toxic for quite a lot of animals. So you cannot only look at it from the amount of temperature increase, but also the capability or the ability of the ecosystem to withstand that at that point of time. This is 2021, and you can see how the temperature records broke, and this is all the way up to Vancouver and Canada, and I think the numbers we were talking about was close to 3 billion animals actually died during this period, including marine animals. So it's really huge numbers. This is this year, and you can see close to us in Iran, 52.2 degrees Celsius. Okay. In these type of temperatures, if you stand outside, you die. You cannot stand outside. You cannot be in open temperature. But there's a bigger problem now. I come from Sri Lanka, and it's a much more humid place, right? We talk about dry bulb temperature and we talk about wet bulb temperature. Now, wet bulb temperature, if it goes to around, I think, close to 32, again, you can't live, right? Because your body's ability to remove heat basically stops. So these are the type of temperatures, and quite a lot of animals cannot withstand this one even in much earlier, especially amphibians, for example, frogs, lizards, those type of animals. What's also going on is glacier melt. Sorry, this is floods. Can anybody guess where this is? This is this year. Yeah, it's Pakistan. And you can see the before and after shots of how literally 2/3 of the country went underwater. And Pakistan is not the only one. If you look at the climate incident record for this year is pretty bad. It's one of the worst ones. As you know, glaciers are melting, and that's a huge issue for a country like Armenia because of water accessibility and water availability. This is in Himalayas, and this is a glacier lake. If you go back to 20 years, you would never find anything like this in Himalayas. And this is what's happening when the temperature, even a small temperature change, can increase the extreme climate events to a very, very high degree. And that's why we are having so much of extreme climate events now. When we talk about climate, we also talk about tipping points. Say, for example, if you look at the Greenland ice sheet, if the whole Greenland ice sheet melts, we will have a sea level rise of about 20 feet, 6 meters. The question is whether we can do anything to reverse it, because there are what we call tipping points. After you cross the tipping point, you cannot reverse it. Well, let me rephrase that. All of the climate impacts that we are seeing can be reversed. However, the question we have to ask is, what is the time scale that it can be reversed, right? So if you take something like ice sheet melting, glacier melting, we talk about the inertia of that system that's basically measured in hundreds of years. So even if we don't emit anything more, these ice sheets are going to continue to melt for a couple of 100 years, and then only it will start reversing. Okay, so a lot of the warming that we have already put out cannot be reversed in our lifetime. Irrespective of how fast, whatever climate agreements we do, however much we do to meet them. Whether we are meeting them is a different question, but that's where the situation is. It's already happening. This is an island in the South Pacific. Kiribati, the island went underwater. They went and bought land in Fiji, which will also go underwater. So these are not future problems. Okay, you can see the date of this article is 2014. It's 8 years ago. This is a picture of the Great Barrier Reef. If you have watched Finding Nemo, Finding Dory, you'll see this. It's quite an accurate description of what it looks like. This is after 2017 heat wave. So if you look at the Great Barrier Reef, it's the single largest ecosystem in the world that's currently there. We look at it in 3 parts. The top part has lost corals. About 2/3 of the living corals are the corals that they used to have died. Second part has about 50% loss, and the third part has about 1/3 loss. There were 3 global coral mass die-out events. First one was in 96-97, second one was in 2010, third one was in 2017. So it's becoming more common. Probably if you watched US news, you would have seen Hurricane Ian, which was a category 4 by a margin, okay, by 2 miles per second. If it increased the wind speed when it hit, increased 2 miles per second, it would have been a category 5. Now scientists are talking about category 6 hurricanes. There is no rating in the hurricane scale. There is no rating for category 6. There is no human infrastructure that can withstand category 6. Very little can actually withstand category 5. Right? Ian is not the only hurricane that was at category 5 that hit land this year. There was one, I think it was Hurricane, it's called Typhoon Noru, which hit Philippines. I might have not got the name right. There was one in Japan. This is Ian, just before it hit this. And what happens is that when the sea level rise, and some of the places got inundated because there were 3 things happening: sea level rise, and high tide, and the accompanying storm surge with that. I know this might not be very familiar to you guys living in Armenia, but this is something that we think about in Sri Lanka. So we talk about adaptation. This picture is the sea walls that Netherlands has built. But climate adaptation is a bit of a funny thing. The reason is that it's very resource driven. So some of the wealthier countries can do good adaptation, but countries like this is Sahel in Africa, they don't have choices, and they do sea turtles. I haven't seen any sea turtle who read this document to figure out how they can adapt. But the problem is that when we talk about adaptation, it's only adaptation for humans, because the species cannot adapt, especially because of the rate of change. So last year when the IPCC gave their report, they said code red for humanity. And that for UN and IPCC to say that, it's a big deal. What are the targets we are talking about? If you don't do anything, we are talking about 6 degrees temperature rise. 4 and 2.5. If you go at the current level, we are probably, even if all the ambitious targets countries have given, we are talking about 2.5 degrees, maybe. If you ask climate scientists, they talk about 350 ppm of carbon dioxide. Now we have 420. None of the targets here are talking about reducing the current carbon dioxide levels that's in the atmosphere. And we know the current levels themselves are not habitable. So increasing it to 1.5 from a scientific point of view is not the correct way, but that's the best we can do. Now, what are the problems? Under 1.5 degrees, I'm just showing the coral reef issue. Under 1.5, the chances of coral reefs, tropical coral reefs surviving is about 1%. Sorry, is about 3%. Under 2 degrees, chance of survival is less than 1%. Yeah.
Are there new species being born? Like being adapted to evolve?
It's very slow because if you think about the way evolution works, it's very long. You talk about centuries of transition, right? So if you look at the what we call this era is it's called Anthropocene. I don't know if you heard of this term. During the history of the planet, there were 5 great extinctions where a large amount of species died out. This is the 6th great extinction. Now, the difference between the previous 5 and the 6th one, the previous 5 were driven by geological changes, either asteroids hitting or slight tilts in the Earth's orbit. This is the only one where a species in the planet is creating an extinction. So the current extinction rate is about 10,000 times higher than the natural extinction rate in the planet. Okay, under 2 degrees, all coral reefs disappear. 3 degrees, marine ecosystems. 4 degrees, half of all planet animal species face local extinction. Sri Lanka has coral reefs, so we had coral reefs all around. Now there's only 2 patches. Most of our coral reefs died in 96-97 extinction event because of the surface temperature increase. 60% of all marine species spend part of their lifetime in a coral reef. That's why it's so important. If you look at COP26, we're actually talking about 2.4 degrees or 2.7 degrees. That's assuming all the countries will take the actions that are promised, which has never happened in the history. So that's how bad it is. And the reason why we have so much of action is not because of governments or companies, but it's because of children. So I just want to talk a little bit about energy security before we talk about energy transition, because the way I look at it, there are 2 key drivers of the energy transition. First one is climate and environmental issues, and second one is energy security. Now, energy security, there are 4 parts. One is availability. You have to have energy available. Second is accessibility. You have to have access to it. Third one is acceptability. People have to accept the type of energy. Fourth one is affordability. When I started talking about it, these were all very theoretical concepts, right? My company works in Bangladesh. Most parts of the country now have about 6 hours power cut. Sri Lanka also has about 2 hours power cut on a daily basis. Why? Because of primarily because of the Ukraine war. Fossil fuels that we dependent on for electricity is no longer affordable. The country cannot afford fossil fuels. Bangladesh used to buy about 60% of their natural gas from liquefied natural gas from the spot market, which has gone up by about 6 times the price, and they can't afford it. Sri Lanka, same, a lot of exposure to oil, cannot afford it. So it has become an energy security issue. The second energy security issue that we know because of the war, what is happening in Europe. For first time, Europe is talking about energy rationing because of the dependency on Russia. So there is also acceptability part, because people don't want to accept coal, people don't want to accept nuclear. This is the biggest driver for the energy transition right now. If you because I've been following European policy, so you would know this. What was happening 2 years ago to what's happening now is completely different. Now the transition is happening so fast, and it's not reversible because they realize that the energy security is the biggest national security threat. Okay, this war would not have happened if Europe was not dependent on energy from Russia. Okay, is this relevant for Armenia? I'm not going to talk much about Armenia because I know only a little bit. But this is an issue for Armenia as well, because we are so reliant on natural gas, which is imported. And it's not always whom we like that's controlling the supply and the price. And it has happened to Armenia before, so it's not something new. So this is interesting on how do you do the transition. So let's talk about the transition. These two charts, I'm happy to share these slides for you so that you can look at it. Are the two parts. This was from International Energy Agency's roadmap to net zero, about how the transition happens. The key piece, if I give it to you in a nutshell, fastest switch is electricity to 100% renewable energy sources. Why? Because right now, probably more than 2/3 of the world, renewable electricity is the cheapest electricity available. Transportation, electric.
You include in that hydro or?
Yes.
So hydro, solar, wind.
Yeah, but solar and wind are now beating everything around the planet in terms of pricing. And I'll show you some of the numbers a bit later on. Transportation, there's a massive shift to electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cells. There's something called green hydrogen. I'll talk about that later. Aviation, green hydrogen and ammonia, and again battery. Marine, same thing. And aviation and marine would probably be some of the organizations that will be slowest to shift. It's not easy. Industrial thermal loads moving to electrification and green hydrogen. So green hydrogen, green ammonia. So let me say what these are. Green hydrogen is made by using electricity to break water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. We make green ammonia because green hydrogen is difficult to transport, because you have to supercool it into a liquid form. It cannot be also sent in pipes because it reacts with the pipe material. So mix it with nitrogen and create ammonia, and that can be used to transport. Cooking, safe biomass and induction stoves. I don't know if you've seen this. This is available in supermarkets in Armenia as well. It's the most efficient way to cook in terms of energy. Heating and cooling, heat pumps. So as you can see, we are rapidly moving away from all combustion, except for biomass. Okay. But underneath that, energy and resource efficiency, insulation. Okay, if you don't do that, no amount, you just can't supply the amount of energy that's being used. So if you look at where our apartments are built, houses are built, they are not very efficient. It's not properly insulated. The cooling and heating systems are not there. There's something called heat pumps, which is run on electricity so that we can get away from natural gas. But these work when we have central cooling and heating. It doesn't work at apartment level. And heat pumps can also be supported through geothermal as well. How fast are these transitions moving? Now, if you look at the European legislation that's coming in, it's very, very strict in terms of how buildings are going to be built. ASHRAE is the global association which sets up the building energy standards. Last I heard, last year, I haven't followed this up, they were going to remove boilers from heating applications inside the buildings. There was a big fight because the fossil fuel companies were blocking it. They were saying the whole pathway is remove all users of fossil fuel, convert everything to electricity, and electrify everything. So your cooking, your heating, cooling, everything should be running on electric. There are bigger changes happening. So I work in the apparel industry. There's hardly an apparel brand that doesn't have decarbonization targets. And these targets are coming back to us. So I work for the manufacturing side. EU has a carbon border tax. I think these are not going to be implemented as fast as they wanted because of the current energy crisis. But this is supposed to be operational from about 2024, where depending on the carbon, it was originally for 6 categories, starting with steel and aluminium, where high carbon intensive stuff, if it's coming into Europe, unless it's built in a low carbon way, it will be taxed at the border. Okay. US Congress also has passed carbon border tax regulation, so this is happening quite a lot.
Can you explain the impact of that will be that as a developed country, you don't transfer the cost to a low developed country. So that when it's a lower developed country produces at a more carbon intensive way, you tax that anyway.
But it's slightly different. There are 2 angles to this. There is the logical explanation. There's an explanation that you gave, and then there is another underlying trade war. What is happening is that EU has very strict carbon trading schemes, EU ETS, right? Where all of the heavy industries have to buy carbon permits, including power stations. So fossil fuel, it's a tax on fossil fuels. So if you're not energy efficient, if you're using a lot of fossil fuel, you have internal cost, right?
It's leveling the playing field.
It's leveling the field. The technical term they use is to avoid carbon leakage, right? So what they don't want is that the manufacturing that was in EU, when EU moves into their road to 55, which is the 55% reduction, they have to use one of the key concepts they are using is the emission trading scheme. And that is increasing the cost for fossil fuels, and then that is forcing companies to shift to renewable energy. Now, easiest thing is you move your cement manufacturing factory to just outside EU, maybe to Turkey, and then send the cement from there. So that's called carbon leakage because those guys are using coal. So that's the key. But there's a second point that was, it's really a trade war with China. Because China is not decarbonizing as fast as Europe and US is. And that's why even the Republicans are supporting the carbon border tax in US. But if you just go and look at something like Science-Based Targets Initiative, RE100, there's so many organizations right now which is business driven, which are really working on decarbonization. For example, anybody heard of BlackRock? BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager. All of the companies that BlackRock invests in have to have a Paris Agreement compliant climate plan. And they are using their votes in the boards to actually make that happen. If you follow, I think ExxonMobil got 3 independent board members voted by BlackRock supported companies. And I think there was another company. There were 3 companies during the 2021. I may have it. I'll say that later. There are 3 companies who climate activists actually put independent directors on the board to support energy transition. Okay, so some of this corporate action is having a serious implication. I'll tell you a good story about a company called AGL, which is one of the largest coal power producers. And 2 investors, these are the richest and the second richest guys in Australia, Mike Cannon-Brookes and Andrew Forrest, basically got the whole board sacked, changed the CEO, because their transition out of coal was not fast enough. Now, just 2 weeks ago, AGL came and said they will close all their coal plants by 2035, I think, 33 or 35. That's the type of thing that's happening in the background. So not everything is bad. Key to decarbonizing transport, walking paths, bicycle lanes. I'm very happy to see what Jervan is doing. Public transport, rideshare, and EVs and hydrogen fuel cells. So there's some really new stuff. The one in the bottom, this is This is a tuk-tuk or three-wheeler that is common in Asia. And this is an electric three-wheeler that is made by a Sri Lankan company. These are the heavy transport trucks. These are all electric. And this is the newest one, battery electric trains. So for a lot of countries who are used to, even Sri Lanka, we don't have electric trains. We are still running old diesel engines. It's very, very expensive to build the electric infrastructure to have the trains running with overhead electric lines. This makes it workable without having to do that investment.
By the way, just to keep the perspective, in Armenia, our metro is electric, and a lot of our train system is electric. So we already have a lot of electric infrastructure.
Correct. Even countries who don't have renewable energy potential or land is rapidly moving to renewable energy. And this is Singapore, very small land area, small country, not enough space. They floated 2 tenders for 4 gigawatts of renewable electricity to be built in some other country and sent to them through undersea HVDC cables. Okay, there's a huge project that is set up in Australia, which is to export electricity to Indonesia and Singapore. So that's how big this industry is.
Underwater?
Yeah.
Is that the number or is there another country that does it?
HVDC cables are quite common. But
Underwater.
yeah, so for example, UK has 5 HVDC connections to Europe. So it's quite common. So this is one, the Pilbara Wind and Solar Export Hub. That's one of the export hubs. So I'm going to show a lot of stuff on Australia, because one thing is something that I study a bit because of its speed of transformation. Right now, Australia is kind of an interesting case because they probably have, I think, first or second largest coal reserves in the world. They also have massive gas and oil. So it's a country full of fossil fuels. But it's also considered to be the country which is doing the energy transition fastest. Coal-free steel, green hydrogen. So these changes are happening very fast. So green steel and green aluminum is something around 2 to 3 years away in the global market. So let's talk about renewable, let's talk about electricity. So what's happening in the electricity? So this is quite interesting because a lot of the time we think that energy transition is that we have a lot of fossil fuel based electricity and we are just moving it to renewable electricity. But it's much more complex and it's much more interesting with a whole bunch of opportunities for everybody. So here are 4 key things. One is renewable centric. Second one is democratic, because if you look at the traditional energy infrastructure, it's only the big players were able to do that. Now it's everybody. Information driven and prosumer.
Everybody, these small producers can produce and give it to
just you and me as well. A lot of us can play a role and okay, it's a bit difficult if you're in an apartment block, but it's still possible. So I'll show you how this works. Sorry.
When talk about that also apply government intervention or
so government intervention has to be there because government has to create the conditions for this transition to happen.
For the smaller players actually.
Correct. And part of the problem is that in most parts of the world, and this is where the implementation challenges come, utilities don't like this. It erodes their power. It makes their life complicated. It destroys their revenue base.
Yes, and one more question. How does the international taxation, do the taxes increase for the bigger players and decrease for the smaller ones?
No, it's actually pricing.
Yes, right.
It's price driven. Okay, because in most parts of the world, putting solar panels on top of your rooftop and giving your excess power to the grid is actually cheaper than the grid trying to generate it through fossil fuels. Okay.
In Armenia, for instance, you can, any excess that you have, you put solar panel, any excess that you have, the grid has to take it from you. And if you don't use any of that, it will pay you half the tariff. So it's 40 drams per kilowatt hours, it will pay you 20 drams.
And it is, you know, I mean, it's cheaper than with the traditional rate of, for example,
For heating, electricity is still a little bit complicated, but I think prices are coming down, but it requires some upfront investment.
I'll just show you the model. Okay, so if you look at the top part, you have this large nuclear, coal and gas power plants, and you have this massive transmission infrastructure, and it's going to the houses. And this is the new model, and this is also a partial description, and I'll show you what's changing, is that everybody can generate, and you have electric vehicles, and you don't have this big fossil fuel infrastructure. And you don't have a massive transmission infrastructure as well. So it's a big shift that is happening. This is something also interesting because previously everybody believed that the way to transition out of coal is go from coal to gas, gas to renewables. But this is no longer the case. You actually move from coal to renewables. And you can see how Europe has shifted, but obviously not fast enough. This is something from Australia, and you can see how the pricing is. Solar, wind, all of that is cheaper than any of the fossil fuels, substantially. Same thing in India, same thing in Sri Lanka, same thing in most countries. So even in
cheaper, but you get the same amount of electricity or the same amount of.
So these are per megawatt hour. So that's based on energy, not on capacity. Okay, so it's a like comparison.
Point if they want to actually transition to gas first, then to renewables.
That was originally the plan, and that's, you can actually see that happening in US because US had this revolution of fracking, and fracking gave them very, very cheap gas. Now, one thing with gas is that you don't have to change anything. You can just take out your coal plant and put a gas plant. Whereas transition to renewables is much more complex. Okay, and this is what I'm trying to show you now. The traditional electricity paradigm is something called the base load paradigm, where you had coal or nuclear plants here, and then you have the kind of variable plants here, and the peak power is taken from here. So if you think about Armenia's case, the bottom one would be the nuclear, and these two will be, second one would mostly be hydro, and the third one will be gas, because that's the most expensive. Now that worked because those days coal and nuclear was the cheapest. Okay, so you want to get most of what was cheapest. Now the cheapest is solar and wind, so you want to get the most of cheapest is solar and wind, and that's here. And you have this really funny way of operating the grid. And that's the problem. Okay, how do you transition from this mode of thing? So it requires a massive mindset change, and it requires a massive technology shift that is happening. And I'm going to talk about that's
the dips basically where you need to fill in.
Correct.
The orange ones that you need to fill in.
Right.
Because otherwise you'll have power outage.
Correct.
If you want to rely on renewables, you need to have storage capacity.
Correct. So what's happening is that, sorry, let me get here. This red line is the demand, and you can see it's perfectly matching in the previous case. Here you have overgeneration. Some of them is used for storage, some of it is lost. And then here you have undergeneration, so you have to plug in those stored ones here. Or you have to do something called demand response, which I will talk about. And that's how it's like a, you know, like a jigsaw box. How do you fill it up?
Some of these traditional ones, it's not that you can turn on and off quickly.
Those are the ones that are used for base load. So nuclear and coal are base load because you can't switch it off, on and off. Okay, but this is also changing, and I'll show you how it's changing, right? So this is 1 week in Germany, and you can see already this model is completely broken. Okay, now this brown one and the black one are coal. Now they're supposed to be running 24/7 flat, but they can't run because of the way the load is happening. Okay, because this is wind and this is solar. So when you have high solar and high wind, you can't remove the nuclear, but you have to really deload coal. And this is how, in this particular week, the German coal plants had to run. So what Germany had to do was to completely change the way they run the coal plants so that they can do fast scaling up and down. Okay, which is very, very difficult to do. It requires a lot of technology intervention and just basically prices them out of the market. So if you look at why US coal plants are closing, they just can't play in this market because they are expected to vary their output up and down. And you can see, that they can get to about almost 80% renewables on some days. This is Germany. This is Australia. This is in a.
Sorry, in the case of Germany, they can also do that because they're part of this European electric network. Right?
Correct.
So this network connectedness helps to have this kind of.
This used to be the this used to be the traditional thinking, but it's also changing, and I'm going to show you how it's changing. The next one is this is Australia. Australia has the largest per capita solar installations in the world. I think it's about 600 watts per person. Okay. They got something like 24 million people, I think 17 gigawatts of solar. And it's just exponential rise. This I'm showing you, this is a state called South Australia, where at some point solar is giving 100% of the power, and here where wind is giving 100% of the power. But again, this is connected to a larger Australian grid. What's on the right-hand side is actually Western Australia, which is an isolated grid. But it's interesting because bulk of the solar that they have is actually rooftop. Okay. But they have to really change how they operate the grid to support this. Now, Armenia, plenty of solar potential, mostly in this area. This area is higher, but it's all over. This is actually good for all parts of the country. Okay, and what's happening now is because solar prices are coming down in a very rapid level. So even in the regions where there used to be low yield, at certain point of time, you cross the threshold where it's still viable. Okay. The other advantage of rooftop solar is that it doesn't force you to construct additional transmission capacity. So, and it reduces things like distribution losses. So there's a lot of benefits in going for rooftop solar. This is wind map. These are all global resources. You can go to this global wind atlas and global solar atlas, and you can see the high wind zones, which are the ones in red. Okay, so I try to look at the renewable energy analysis for Armenia, and the study seems to be a bit dated. So 2008 was what I've seen in the previous studies, which really requires a rethink because the type of, for example, wind turbines and how we can harvest power from wind actually changed during that period.
But the winds change.
Sorry?
The winds change. Calculated, and then you're good for 100 years.
Not 200. No. The wind turbines are about 20 to 30 years.
No, I mean like the direction of winds.
So they will change with climate for sure. But what happened was that in the previous era, the wind turbine technology was not that good. So you need to have really, really strong winds to generate. Now the turbine technology has increased. The turbine hub height has increased. So earlier you could only put it at this height. Now you can put it much higher. If you look at what's happening in offshore wind, now we have offshore wind, which is mounted on the sea bed. And now we have offshore wind, which is actually floating. You can actually have floating. I think Denmark is the one. I think Denmark just started a new project that creating an energy island, which is solar and wind island, which is floating in the sea that is going to power the country. So what's happening in this phase is completely transformative. It's nothing that, every time you look 2 years after, just go to sleep for 2 years and you will not recognize what's happening. So you have to change your system. Earlier we used to plan dispatch, which means how the energy is generated 1 day in advance or more. Now most grids are 5-minute advance, because what it does is there are sophisticated modeling algorithms that can predict the solar and wind output. Right, so you can actually plan how you're going to run the grid. A lot of hydro is used for regulation, so that's the variation rather than just generating straight off. Battery and pump storage for balancing. Pump storage is 2 reservoirs at 2 different levels. You pump from the top one to the bottom one and generate energy by running it through a. When you have excess energy, like say you have a lot of solar, you have excess energy, you use the bottom one to pump it back to the top. So it actually acts as a battery. There's frequency, inertia, and voltage market. I'm going to talk about that bit later. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this, but I want to just say these are the traditional issues that we've spoken about as problems for renewable energy penetration. Just simply to say that all of those problems have been successfully and commercially solved. Okay, so there is no serious restriction on going for 100% renewable energy except for seasonality. Seasonality is the only one you need to worry about. The second one, this is the wind forecasting that is in the Texas grid, again isolated grid. And as you can see, year on year, the error has actually reduced. So they've been really able to project and predict using AI actual wind generation so that they can plan the grid and run the grid. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of technology that underlies the energy grid, because the energy grid used to be the domain of mechanical and electrical engineers. Now it's really IT driven. And it's not only in the West. India is again one of the countries, along with China, fastest renewable energy adoption. So India has 11 renewable energy project prediction centers that are helping them to plan their grid. And also, one of their coal plants, they again, using the German technology, scaled it to vary. There are islanded grids. Kauai Island is running on 80% renewable energy now. This is an island in Hawaii. So again, this is the breaking of the myth that you have to be connected to the wider grid, and there's a lot of storage in there. Hawaii is actually also quite interesting one. You can see I haven't put the 2021 final numbers. But Australia is also quite of interesting because they will have zero demand in their power system at certain times by 2025. Why? Because the total power requirement will be coming from rooftop solar. Imagine 100% of the power coming from rooftop solar at some points of time by 2026. Right? So you have to really sorry?
And the grid can power.
So they're redoing the grid with technology to do that. So if you do, that's why it's fastest evolving. So if you look at the amount of battery storage that's put in the grid in Australia, it's amazing. So this is Project Symphony, because as I showed you earlier, Western Australia sometimes get 80% renewable energy, mostly from rooftop solar. Now they're trying to manage it because they have a big renewable energy generation during daytime and then everything else has to be fossil fuel. So how do you manage the storage alongside that? So NEM is this is the answer to what you asked, Alan. This is the engineering framework that was developed last year to plan for the next 5 years in Australian main grid, where you're going to have 100% renewable electricity coming mostly from distributed sources. There's another slide, I'll show you that one later. So we talk about battery storage. Now, battery storage is used for 2 different things, actually 3 different things. One is when you have a lot of solar or wind, you can store that energy and use it when there's not there. So primary use a lot of the time is store during daytime when there's excess solar, use it during night when there is no solar. But in the electric grid, there are what we call ancillary services. There's frequency support, there is voltage support, there is inertia. Those are the 3 most important things. And then there's 4th one called reactive power. Those were normally coming from fossil fuel power plants with large rotating masses. Now we are talking about power systems that are coming with inverters that does not have that. And this is where battery storage comes in. And they can support all of those services. This is frequency support. This is inertia support. These are all real life cases. Okay, so what you see in the first half, where Tesla is the one who built this battery, it's called the Hornsdale Energy Reserve in Australia, where they mimic something called inertia in the system, which up till about 3-4 years, most engineers thought cannot be done through inverters. So it's doing that already. And these are called grid forming batteries. Okay, this is from Tesla. There's a real interesting story behind this. South Australia had a major blackout in 2017 because it's connected to a grid in Victoria through one power line. And during a storm, this power line went off, and because it was not connected, the whole system crashed. Elon Musk came and said, I will give you a battery and stop your problems in 3 months. If I can't finish this in 3 months, I'll give it to you for free. And it's a lot of marketing. It's Musk's marketing, where the project was in the plans much longer than that. And that was the Hornsdale Reserve. And it recovered its money, I think, in less than 2 years. Okay, not by storing energy, but by providing frequency support, which is a service that Australia used to get from gas turbines. They said, okay, shut down your gas turbines, I'm going to give it to you at much lower cost. These technologies are the critical requirements for us to get rid of the fossil fuels. Yes.
One version of podcast is there's not enough raw material to make batteries, enough batteries to replace the amount of cars we have today.
That is true if you don't think about the chemistry. Okay, so what's happening now is that there are probably 50 different chemistries of batteries available in the market. Okay, earlier we had one type of lithium-ion batteries. Now even lithium-ion batteries, there are about 5 types. Okay, so what's been really interesting is that now there's battery made out of iron. Okay, so there's new categories of batteries coming in. There's huge amounts of money put into the modern battery service. Okay. Not yet in the foreseeable future, because the innovations are coming fast on this, right? And we have to thank the mobile phone for this technology, because mobile phones are the ones who actually change the battery. Lithium-ion battery is what you have here, and the same thing is what Tesla is building. They put it in the car and they put it in the grid. Okay, but now it's very different. The chemistries are evolving. Another innovation, again coming out of, are we behind time? Okay, maybe another 5 minutes more. Virtual power plant. Here, what they're doing is again South Australia. You get houses to put solar panels and batteries individually, but network them through 5G. and you mimic a power plant.
What?
You mimic a power plant. It's a virtual power plant.
What would the 5G do?
Sorry?
What? What would the 5G are?
Because it's networked, it's connected. Okay, so it behaves like a power plant. It behaves like a 250 megawatt power plant, 50,000 people, 50,000 individual houses installing solar panels and battery storage, and you mimic a 250 megawatt power plant, and you get contract with the utility. Okay, and what's interesting is that they can make what we call a bespoke generation curve. Okay, so for example, if you take a normal power plant, it will either generate a flat one or you have a particular variation. If it's solar, it's like this. These guys have a peak that is in the evening because they're using the battery. So you can actually create a customized generation profile and therefore be much more valuable to the grid than a conventional power plant. California has it, Australia has about 3, Boston has it, a lot of places in US has it. Yes, you had a question.
Yeah, so I don't understand how they actually mimic the power plant, where they connect the houses together.
No, everybody is giving power to the grid from where they are, right? But everybody behaves in the same manner. They give at the correct same time, same amount of power through their either solar system or through the battery backup, so that it literally acts as a power plant. So as far as the grid controller is concerned, I'm getting 250 megawatts of power. So I can contract at wholesale rates.
So this virtual power plant becomes a contractor.
Contractor.
Yeah.
So
you become a service provider to the grid.
you provide a large scale power supply. So if you are at house, you will have a 5 kilowatt system. So you are negotiating with the utility as a small scale retailer. Now you're leveraging this 50,000 people's power and leveraging at much stronger position. Okay. Then there's a second thing. I told you there is frequency services. Okay, frequency support. What is a frequency support? I'll explain this so that it's easy. Let's say some power plant goes out of power. You have to immediately inject a lot of electricity so that the grid doesn't collapse. Okay, that can be done by these guys. So the business model is you give frequency support and you give energy both, and that makes the power plant much faster payback. Okay. Here is something much more interesting.
Going back to these virtual power plants.
Huh.
Is the market rapidly developing in this? Are people organizing quickly this virtual power plant?
This is not people organizing. There is something called community solar where people are organizing. This is actually done by a large company like Tesla.
They bring together, they sell products,
Mm-hmm.
and then by virtue of that, they create the community.
Yeah, so they sell the product at a discount to the house owner and give a guaranteed payment for their power. Okay, which is much more lucrative than what if you do rooftop solar by yourself, because the value to the grid is much higher. Sorry.
So for it to work, people must follow for it, right? So is there a contract?
Yes.
And enforcing this, and if there is a punishment.
It's not a contract. Once you install the system, you don't have control over the system. That's what the network is doing. Sorry, you first and then you.
And you use the energy that you actually harvest, or you use the energy from the grid, but you actually provide them with your energy.
You will do both, right? You will consume and excess you give out. But excess you give out at a particular date, because there are 3 things: your self-consumption, your battery storage, and export. All 3. How you manage it. I used to have the power curve out of this. I'll see if I can dig it up.
Hypothetically, in Armenia, me and my neighbor, can we just do it ourselves?
No.
Why not? Because,
Well, so long as you, but for the power company to contract with you, you have to have scale.
But when the law here says that you have to give back to the grid.
Correct.
You
So
use that power as leverage.
5 people getting together can't negotiate with the grid.
No, I know.
20 versus 25.
Yeah. So
If
if you
Tesla
can,
comes and organizes all of you guys,
Yeah.
then yeah, Tesla will then negotiate.
because the key here is the software that governs the process. Okay. And it's not only energy, as I said, it's system support through frequency services. That's where the big money is. Right? So that you need to have power, and frequency support is not useful at retail level. You need to have scale to do that. Right? But here's something you can do. So have a look at these 3 companies: Line Jump, Social Energy, and Flexicity. Okay. These are what we call flexible power companies. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this company is that they actually don't have any assets they own. Okay. What they do is that this is like Uber. Okay. Uber doesn't own any of the vehicles. Uber doesn't own any of the, drivers are not employed by them. What does Uber do? It's a software, right? So these guys all have software. Now, what do? They get different companies who have assets to sign up to them. Now, what is asset? You have battery in your house, that's asset. There's maybe a large scale industrial battery guy, that's an asset. You have a big hotel which has an air conditioner, that's an asset. You have a compressor in a manufacturing plant, that's an asset. You have a backup generator, that's an asset. Okay. Now, how is this used? Okay. This is an actual scenario out of Line Jump. Okay. So let's say, and I remember the incident. UK is connected to Europe through pipes. This is HVDC lines. Sometime one of these lines went out of business, and that lost 500 megawatts of power. Okay. These guys are registered in the UK grid as the flexible power supply. Now, what they're doing is that 500 loss they are providing as a service to the grid. Okay. Now, traditionally, grid has to have 500 megawatts of a massive backup power plant to support this failure. How are these guys doing it? They first inject power through the battery storage they have. Okay. Now, that's
all the
network battery storage that are assets in their disposal. Right now, you're injecting a lot of power, and battery will discharge very fast. So batteries react fast. So that's a sub-second response. Okay. Then what happens is all the air conditioners and compressors that are linked to your network shut down. So first the batteries are injecting power. When the batteries stop injecting power, you are reducing same amount of power from the grid by knocking off your air conditioners and compressors. Okay. Now let's say you are running an air conditioned system. You can knock off your compressor for 3 to 5 minutes. After that, you have to put it back. Within 3 to 5 minutes, your backup generators are powering up and inject power from another side. So now what you have done is people and companies have so much of power assets that are idle. Power companies build massive amount of backup power, which are also idle. So you remove that backup power and give it as a service using your existing assets. So it's a very common service now.
But you need software,
you need networking, and you need to have a system control center that can take those services, which a lot of countries do. So that's why this is completely IT technology driven. This is complete suite of, they do frequency, storage, balancing mechanism, capacity market, trading, everything. And if you have assets, you can just go to them and sign up. Demand response with Google Nest. So this is something interesting. Lot of utilities, if you have electricity-based cooling and heating, have this program where you are connecting through a thermostat. Google has the famous one, Google Nest. where the control of the thermostat is given to the grid. Okay, so when there is a sudden shortage of power, they will crank up the thermostat so that your air conditioner stops working for a short period or for a longer period. But by signing up to this program, utility can avoid keeping backup power and give part of that benefit to the consumer. So this is what we're saying. This is prosumer. There are many ways you can play this game, right? So technology driven. And the final part I want to show is green hydrogen.
So when you buy this and you sign on to the service, you agree that there will be some modulation in your air temperature.
Yeah.
If you're a hospital owner, you don't sign up to this because you need to maintain constant temperature. You don't want to lose control of that.
This is mostly for domestic. So this is by getting domestic consumers involved in a process called demand response. Okay, so that you don't keep massive amount of fossil fuel infrastructure as backup. The last thing I want to show you is that the biggest change that's happening is green hydrogen. How serious is this? India has, there's no fossil fuel company that does not have a green hydrogen plan. Whether you go for Shell, whether you go for Equinor, whether you go for BP, which doesn't have green hydrogen plan, that is already in the works. Okay, one of the biggest green hydrogen investors is actually Kuwait is our invest fund. Okay, all of these guys are doing. Oman is building a massive green hydrogen hub, as is Australia. India has a national green hydrogen mission. Sri Lanka already has a pilot. Okay, so one thing that's happening is that Sri Lanka has offshore gas and oil, which the country is now giving as concessions for global developers to come. It's designed, earlier we used to give oil and gas exploration. Now we are giving energy exploration. So the way it's structured is oil, gas, renewable energy, and green hydrogen also as a hub. Okay, so it's huge. Australia, when they do their energy plan, they do it every 2 years, develop multiple scenarios. And these are the 4 scenarios I showed you in the previous, in the last one. This is 2021 plan. There's something called hydrogen superpower. Okay. And you can see how much of renewables they are planning to build under this scenario, this green chart. It's already started. I think the first plant they started constructing. There's huge amount of money that is put in there. These are actual stuff that's going on. Okay, I took a lot more time than I thought I would, but thank you for keeping it.
No photos of Sri Lanka, don't you?
Sorry?
No photos of Sri Lanka.
We've seen a lot.
Have you?
I can show you. You asked a question. One of the things you wanted me to talk about, which I haven't specifically spoken about, is the challenges in some of the emerging markets on this. So my entry into this electricity sector was some time back. I got involved in a campaign to stop Sri Lanka from building a coal plant. And I realized that I had to learn this to actually argue against the utility guys. And I had to learn everything from inertia to grid balancing to storage, and actually know more about this than they did. To be on TV and on newspapers to build the campaign. So this is how I started. Quite a large problem is that when you have monopolies, they don't want to change. So one of the biggest problems is most parts of the world, electricity sector is driven by monopolies, and a lot of the time, state or limited actors driven monopolies. Okay, so they would like you to continue and be lazy, even though the pricing is different. Second is that all the grids are very ancient. They are not technology driven. And you can see the transformation comes with technology. There's technology investment has to come. Policy frameworks are quite awful. So what's happening now in Sri Lanka is that they are converting the complete legislative structure as part of the sector reform package. Hopefully that will make changes. But the biggest and most problematic area is the mindset and lack of knowledge. Okay, a lot of the stuff I had to develop different versions of this presentation to also educate some of the utility guys. Okay, half of what is here is not taught in universities in the electrical engineering side. And that's partly because it's changing so fast. And it's the mindset, and if you can't overcome that mindset, these transitions are not happening. So these are the 4 biggest challenges I've seen. And they are very deep-rooted challenges. So for example, to change engineers' thinking, you have to start changing the university professors' thinking. Okay, who's been teaching the same course for decades. So these are the 4 big challenges that I've seen in Sri Lanka. We've been able to change some of them, but not enough and not fast enough. Seen the same in Bangladesh as well, which is worse. Anyway. Sorry, we had a lot of questions coming from few of you. Any other questions? You're one of the few, so I would want to give a couple of others more chance, and then I'll come back to you. Sure.
Yeah, we talked about nuclear power and you categorized it as how much not acceptable was, but comparatively, it does not emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere directly. It has some radioactive waste that it can be managed correctly. So, what's the main point of not the nuclear power?
Okay. I would say there are 3 challenges with nuclear power. First one is, what do we do with radioactive waste, right? I haven't seen a really good solution for radioactive waste. It's buried in some place and keep praying that no seismic activity will happen there. With climate change, all bets are off, because climate change is actually changing the weight of tectonic plates. Okay, so what's going to happen is that there's actually a buried nuclear waste site in Arctic, which is now a huge concern. Okay, nuclear waste site in the Arctic. There's a buried one. Okay, now Arctic is melting. Within the, I don't know who it was. You know, what we call as Arctic Circle is quite likely to be ice-free in the next 20 years. There's a lot of changes that's happening. Yeah.
What?
But there's also residual radiation that we are not talking about. Okay, so there's a lot of concern, especially in France. Second issue, there's huge reliability problem. If you look at what's happening to France right now, I think a couple of months ago, 50% of their plants are not working due to various issues. Okay, so there's a reliability issue as the plants age. Okay, it's not happening in brand new plants. The third challenge is that this model of base load is disappearing. So you cannot really run your system very efficiently when you have a lot of nuclear power. Okay, if you have nuclear power, like in Germany case where it's just a small amount, maybe. But when you get larger, so for example, if I talk about the Australian model where there's zero load during daytime, you can't run it. So it's not compatible with variable renewable energy paradigm. Fourth issue, I wouldn't want to touch a nuclear plant looking at what's happening in Ukraine right now. This whole Ukraine is literally held hostage based on those 2 nuclear power plants. Not the nuclear attack, but it's a power plant.
What is in the piece of Ukraine, what is more troubling is the precedent set how you can blackmail countries with this. Because now Turkey, for instance, can start blackmailing us with attack on, our nuclear power plant. And this can become a political tool, which hadn't happened up to now.
Yeah, and if your focus is genocide, what an easy way of cleaning people out. So I think a lot of people are rethinking. There's something called SNR, small nuclear reactors, that's coming out. This is supposed to be running on thorium rather than this thing. But the problem is, the issue is this, that's minimum 1 decade away from commercialization. I think solar and wind is going to kick everybody's asses. Where nuclear power plants, small nuclear power plants will be interesting to use is that where I get spoiled. I mean, I look at Australia, I look at Sri Lanka, I look at India. None of these countries have a problem in giving 100% renewable electricity 365 days. Okay, because we have various sources. We have wind, we have solar, we have hydro. And by using the combination, we can do that. But this is not the case for Bangladesh, for example, because there is a period, say winter, there is very little sun, it's covered in smog, and there's very little wind. So how do you do renewable energy there? So some countries will find the use for this, but I think it has a lot more risks. Any more questions? Yes. Wait 1 minute. I'm just going to make sure that nobody else has.
Yes. Anything, Christine, from your EU experience?
There was a question about how imports market, and in general, for example, each year consumers are forced to switch from users because the prices are doubling once we
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. The government has a very, very critical role to play because they have to set the conditions.
But also governments set the conditions for the monopolies. It's like you have to now change the rules of the game. It's still government has a role there.
Yes, because
They set the rules of the games for the monopolies under the understanding that there's economies of scale. And there have to be monopolies and so on and so forth.
not anymore. Yeah, not anymore. But monopolies, because of their monopoly power, is blocking reform. So
yeah, now then it is a political economy.
So I'll give you and for sure, political economy is the biggest piece to tackle. So in Sri Lankan case, where we are having energy shortage because we can't afford fossil fuels because of the economic collapse, renewable energy is dirt cheap, but the utility is blocking renewable energy uptake. Okay, they are not giving a viable tariff for rooftop solar. They are not giving viable tariff for other renewable energy projects, and they are not tendering. So what is the solution? You have to break it up. Okay, that's one of the things. So that's why there's a new law that's supposed to come. It's being drafted right now. That's going to break it up. But breaking up is just a simple word. There's a lot more complex stuff that's happening in the regulatory space that has to enable. So you have to have special enablement for something like a virtual power plant to come. Yes.
I want to trivialize like all these things that are going on in the world, changing into renewable energy, getting off the carbon stuff. But is there enough money going into trying to find technology that we wouldn't have to go through all this? Like renewable energy is not, it's working, but like it's not as efficient as coal, and I feel like it's going to take another 100 years till we get there. Do we have enough money? Are people spending enough money trying to find a perfect replacement of coal?
we are not finding a perfect replacement for coal because coal is such a crude tool. Okay, so this is where we fail. We are trying. Is the internet access here?
I don't know, try again, maybe make sure it's the right. Right. That's all.
First of all, we are not trying to mimic renewable energy. Sorry, coal power. Okay, because coal power is a crude tool. We have different ways. High emissions, not flexible.
No, I know. That's why I was saying,
But we don't need to mimic renewable energy. See, this is not a replacement of a landline. I don't know if you know what a landline is. You know, it's not a rotary phone. You don't need to find it. You can find something much better. Okay, you don't need to have centralized power with massive transmission lines for energy, which is something that comes with a coal power plant. Okay, now, how do we talk about money? It's actually cheaper because coal is not free. Okay, in Sri Lanka, we use oil-based power for 25% of our requirements. I can take 10% of, so right now out of the 25%, if I replace solar power for 10% of that oil-based power, that money I'm investing on solar panels is recovered through the oil saving, but I don't pay for oil in 3 years. So you're actually saving much more. This energy transition is happening simply because it's cheap. Okay, not because everybody thought, oh, climate change is a big deal, we need to address it. Okay, that's why it's happening faster now than what it used to be a long time back. So if you look at, this is the Australian grid across the last, how many years? From 1999, they're literally adding about 5% additional, 3 to 5% of renewable energy per year. And their target is to, right now, what is it? 31.4 last year. They'll hit 82% in 2030. So 82% of all electricity coming out of Australia generating will be renewable electricity. Sri Lanka will go from 35 to 70 also in next 8 years. So this change that's happening is huge. And there's definitely enough money because it's the money that we will not spend on fossil fuels. Yes.
Also, when you say that it's cheaper, so is it considered considering the fact that, like, for example, solar panels would be changed, like
Which is changing?
like, for example, change or like all the solar panels have to be changed.
So modern solar panels has a 25-year lifetime, 20 to 25-year lifetime. Yes, so it is considering that as well. But if you take coal plant life is about 30 years. Okay, so everything has a lifetime, and this is how different the pricing is. And this pricing is expected to come down to 50% of the current pricing in the next 10 years. Everything from storage, there's a huge price reduction trajectory that's coming in.
The technology innovation, it may suddenly become our, computer storage space used to be.
I mean, you can, so I can tell you, the first solar installation I was involved in for my company, not the current company, previous company, was in 2008. It was 25 kilowatts. Okay. I think then the second one was in 2011. That was 1 megawatt. The price reduced to 1/3 compared to what I was paying in 2008. Okay, now, and the third one was in 2018, where it was about 16 megawatts. Again, the price had literally halved. That was the price trajectory. It's very easy to find price reduction. If you ask people like Adani is one of the largest coal magnates. I think the second richest guy in the world right now, right? Yeah. But he also has a company called Adani Green Energy, which is probably the largest or second largest renewable energy asset owner in the world. They were talking about 1 cent to 2 cents per kilowatt hour in about a decade. Okay.
It's a bit